You went ahead and defied me. I'll show you who's boss around here. You think this is over?
Everyone move. Get off the porch. Now!
I've always been the kind of person who prefers things simple, predictable, and, if I'm being honest, quiet. At 37, I'd reached a point where I didn't feel the need to fill every moment with noise or people. I liked my routines. Morning coffee on the porch, evenings spent fixing small things around the house, weekends that didn't require planning weeks in advance. It wasn't boring to me. It was steady. And steady felt earned. I'd moved into the neighborhood about 6 months before my birthday. It wasn't anything flashy, just a modest house on a calm street where people waved politely but mostly kept to themselves. Exactly what I wanted. No unnecessary drama, no constant interruptions. Just enough friendliness to feel human, not enough to feel overwhelmed. The porch had been one of the main reasons I picked the place. It wrapped slightly around the front corner of the house, wide enough for a couple of chairs and a small table. I'd spent weeks slowly making it my own, nothing extravagant. Just some warm string lights, a couple of sturdy wooden chairs, and a small setup where I could sit in the evenings and unwind. It became my space. My reset button after long days. So when my birthday came around, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Host a gathering. Not a big one. Definitely not the kind that takes over your entire house and leaves you regretting it the next morning. Just a handful of close friends. People who understood the meaning of low-key. Good food. Relaxed conversation. Maybe some music playing softly in the background. Something that felt easy. I planned it carefully, probably more carefully than necessary. The porch was going to be the centerpiece. I added a few extra lights, set up a long table for snacks, and made sure there was enough seating without making things feel crowded. Inside, I kept things minimal, just in case, but I knew most of the evening would happen outside. It felt right. By late afternoon on the day of the party, everything was ready. The food was laid out, drinks were chilled, and the lights along the porch gave off a soft, warm glow as the sun started to dip. For once, I wasn't overthinking things. I was actually looking forward to it. There was only one variable I hadn't quite figured out. The neighbors. I didn't know most of them well, and I hadn't formally invited any. But in neighborhoods like this, gatherings tend to be noticed. I wasn't worried about complaints. Everything was well within reason, but there was always that small uncertainty about who might wander over or take interest. And then there was Kathy. I'd met her about a month after moving in. She lived a few houses down, though met might not be the right word. It was more like she introduced herself to me, suddenly and without much room for input. I was out front one afternoon adjusting the porch lights when she walked straight up my driveway like we'd known each other for years. "You're the new one, right?" she'd said, not as a question but a statement. I remember pausing, a screwdriver still in my hand, trying to catch up to the energy she'd brought with her. "Yeah," I'd replied. "Just moved in recently." "I figured," she said, glancing around like she was assessing the place. "I'm Kathy." She didn't wait for much more before continuing. Within a couple of minutes, I knew where she worked, what she thought about the neighborhood, and which houses she liked and didn't like. The conversation leaned heavily in one direction. Hers. I mostly nodded, adding the occasional response when there was space. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly. Just a lot. Before leaving, she said, "We should hang out sometime," in the same tone someone might use to confirm a plan that had already been agreed on. I gave a polite sure, but didn't take it any further. After that, I'd see her occasionally. A quick wave, sometimes a short exchange if our paths crossed. She always seemed to carry that same strong presence, confident, a little loud, and very certain of herself. I kept things friendly but distant. So when the evening of my birthday arrived, Kathy wasn't someone I expected to see. By early evening, my friends started arriving one by one. The atmosphere settled in quickly. Laughter came easy, conversations overlapped without becoming chaotic, and the soft background music blended perfectly with everything else. People drifted between the porch and the front yard, drinks in hand, relaxed in a way that didn't require effort. Exactly what I'd hoped for. At one point, I stepped back for a moment, leaning lightly against the porch railing and just taking it in. The lights, the voices, the sense of everything working the way it was supposed to. It felt good. Simple, but good. For once, Nothing felt off. And then it did. The sound came out of nowhere. A sudden, sharp crash that didn't belong in the rhythm of the evening. It wasn't loud in a dramatic, overwhelming way, but it was wrong. Completely out of place. The kind of sound that cuts through conversation instantly. Everything stopped. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. Heads turned toward the source at almost the same time. For a second, there was just silence, the kind where everyone's trying to process what they just heard. Then someone said, "Was that?" I didn't wait for the rest. I turned toward the front of the porch, and that's when I saw it. A car. Partially up against the edge of the porch. Not fully through it, not anything extreme, but enough to be unmistakably out of place. One of the front support posts had been knocked slightly out of alignment, and a section of the decorative railing had shifted where the impact happened. It didn't look catastrophic, but it definitely wasn't supposed to be like that. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to connect what I was seeing with what had just happened. Then the driver's door opened, and out stepped Kathy. She looked more startled than anything else, but not in the way I expected. "Oh my God," she said, her voice carrying easily across the now silent yard. That was so sudden. There was a pause. Not from her, from everyone else. I walked a few steps closer, my mind still catching up. "Are you okay?" I asked. It was the first thing that came to mind. The most immediate concern. "Yeah, I'm fine," she said quickly, brushing a hand through her hair, as if that settled it. "I don't even know what happened. Your driveway kind of comes in at a weird angle." I glanced at the driveway. It didn't. I looked back at her, then at the car, then at the porch. Behind me, I could feel the attention of everyone at the party. No one was speaking, but everyone was watching. I started, then stopped. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I was still trying to figure out where to start. Kathy stepped fully away from the car, glancing briefly at the porch like it was a minor inconvenience rather than the center of the situation. "Well," she said, exhaling lightly, "at least I made it." There was something about the way she said it, casual, almost relieved, that didn't match the moment. I blinked. "You made it." I repeated. "Yeah," she said, gesturing loosely toward the house. I saw the lights and figured this must be where everything was happening. Everything. I hadn't invited her. I hadn't even mentioned the party to her. And yet, here she was, standing in front of a partially damaged porch, acting like she'd just arrived slightly later than expected. Behind me, one of my friends shifted slightly, the wooden boards of the porch creaking softly under the movement. The sound seemed louder than usual, drawing attention back to the structure that had just been hit. I looked at the post again, still standing, but not quite the way it had been an hour ago. Then I looked back at Kathy. She didn't look concerned about it. If anything, she seemed more focused on the fact that she'd arrived. And in that moment, standing between a disrupted evening and a situation that hadn't fully settled into reality yet, I realized something important. The crash wasn't going to be the most complicated part of the night. Not even close. For a few seconds after Kathy said, "At least I made it," nobody really knew how to respond. It was the kind of moment where your brain tries to catch up with what just happened, but the situation keeps moving anyway. I could feel the shift behind me. My friends were no longer relaxed observers of a quiet birthday evening. They were alert now, watching closely, waiting to see how this would unfold. I took a breath and stepped a little closer to the edge of the porch. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady, "can we just pause for a second?" Kathy looked at me, then at the porch, then back at me again, like she was trying to decide which part of this deserved her attention. "I mean, yeah," she said, shrugging lightly. "I already said I'm fine." "I'm glad you're okay," I replied. "But, the porch." I gestured toward the slightly shifted post and railing. Up close, the misalignment was more obvious. Not catastrophic, but definitely not something you could ignore. Kathy followed my gesture with her eyes and tilted her head. "Oh," she said. "That actually moved more than I thought." There was no urgency in her tone. No concern, just observation, like she was commenting on furniture someone else owned. I waited for the next part. An apology, a question, anything that acknowledged what had just happened. Instead, she crossed her arms loosely and said, "You might want to fix that." I stared at her for a second. You might want to fix that. Yeah, she said, nodding. It looks kind of uneven now. Behind me, I heard someone let out a quiet, disbelieving breath. I kept my expression neutral, but internally, something shifted. Not anger, not yet. Just clarity. Right, I said slowly. But your car just hit it. She exhaled, like I was overcomplicating something simple. Okay, but let's not make it a huge thing, she replied. It's not like the whole thing collapsed or anything. The way she said it, let's not make it a huge thing, felt less like a suggestion and more like a conclusion she'd already reached. I glanced back at the group. A couple of my friends exchanged looks. One of them raised their eyebrows slightly, as if to say, is this really happening? Yeah, it was. Kathy, meanwhile, seemed to have mentally moved on. She stepped past me, walking up onto the porch like nothing had interrupted her arrival. Her footsteps landed carefully between the boards, but her attention was already elsewhere. Oh wow, you actually did a whole setup, she said, scanning the decorations and table. This is nice. And just like that, she was in the middle of the party. I turned, watching as she approached the snack table. She picked up a drink, glanced at it briefly, then took a sip like she'd been there from the beginning. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of the situation outside. Just continuation. For a moment, I stayed where I was, trying to decide how to handle it. Part of me wanted to immediately stop her, to redirect the entire situation back to what had just happened. The other part of me, the part that preferred calm and order, wanted to avoid turning the evening into something tense and uncomfortable for everyone else. So I walked back toward her, keeping my voice even. Kathy, I said, before anything else, we should probably figure out what just happened out there. She turned toward me, drink still in hand. I mean, we already know what happened, she said. I pulled in, and the angle was weird. The angle wasn't weird, I said gently. The driveway's pretty straightforward. She gave a small, dismissive wave of her hand. Okay, but from my perspective, it wasn't, she replied. And it's kind of dark. You might want to add better lighting or something. I blinked. Better lighting. I glanced up at the string lights I'd spent time setting up, the ones currently illuminating the entire porch area in a soft, steady glow. They're on, I said. Yeah, but like, brighter, she said, as if that solved everything. There was a brief pause. I could feel the patience in the room thinning, not dramatically, just enough to be noticeable. One of my friends stepped a little closer, not intervening, just present. Supportive without escalating anything. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. Lighting aside, your car still made contact with the porch, so we should probably talk about what to do next. Kathy sighed, shifting her weight slightly. Why does it have to be a whole discussion right now? She asked. You're literally in the middle of your party. The irony of that statement didn't seem to register for her. Exactly, I said. Which is why I'd like to resolve it quickly, so we can move on. She took another sip of her drink, considering that. I just feel like you're making it more serious than it needs to be, she said. It was an accident. I agree, I replied. It was an accident. That doesn't mean we ignore it. For a second, she didn't respond. She looked at me, then around at the others, as if trying to gauge whether anyone else shared her perspective. No one jumped in. No one agreed with her. The silence wasn't hostile. It was just clay. Still, she didn't shift much. Instead, she leaned slightly against the table and said, "Can I at least relax for a minute?" That was stressful. There it was. The pivot. From minimizing the situation to centering herself in it. I nodded once. Slowly. I understand that it felt stressful, I said. But right now, the priority is addressing what happened. She frowned slightly. So I don't even get a minute, she asked. You do, I said. Just not before we figure out the basics. Another pause. This one felt different. Less confusion. More tension. Behind her, the porch creaked faintly again as someone shifted their stance. The subtle reminder of the damage lingered in the background, impossible to fully ignore. Kathy set her drink down. Okay, she said, her tone tightening just a little. So what exactly do you want me to do right now? It wasn't an open question. It felt more like a challenge. I kept my voice level. First, acknowledge what happened, I said. Then we can talk about next steps. She let out a short laugh, not amused, more incredulous. I already said it was an accident. That's not the same as taking responsibility, I replied. That landed. Not dramatically, but enough to shift something in her expression. She straightened slightly, folding her arms again. I feel like you're trying to make me the bad guy here, she said. I'm not, I said. I'm just asking you to recognize the situation. She looked at me for a long second. Then, instead of responding directly, she said, you know what? I don't think this is fair. Faye. Yeah, she continued. I show up, something unexpected happens, and suddenly I'm being put on the spot in front of everyone. I glanced around. No one was crowding her. No one was accusing her. The only pressure in the moment was coming from the reality of what had happened. This isn't about putting you on the spot, I said. It's about addressing something that affected my home. She opened her mouth like she was about to argue again, but then stopped. For a brief moment, the confidence she'd been carrying all evening wavered. Not gone, just less certain. And that was the turning point. I took a step back, not physically, but in tone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't push harder. I just became more direct. Kathy, I said, I'm not trying to make this uncomfortable, but I do need you to take this seriously. The room was quiet. No music now. No overlapping conversations. Just a steady, focused stillness. You can stay, I continued, but not like this. We need to deal with what happened first. She looked at me, really looked this time. Not past me, not around me, at me. And for the first time since she arrived, it seemed like she was actually processing the situation, not just reacting to it. The energy shifted again. Not resolved, but no longer one-sided. And as the moment settled, one thing became clear to everyone standing there. The night wasn't going to continue the way it started, but it also wasn't going to spiral. Because now, finally, there were boundaries in place. For the first time since she stepped out of the car, Kathy didn't respond immediately. She stood there, arms still loosely crossed, but her posture had changed. The certainty she'd been carrying all evening had softened, not completely gone, but no longer leading the situation. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the edge of the porch, then back to me, as if she was finally connecting the sequence of events in a more grounded way. Okay, she said after a moment, her tone quieter. I get that it looks bad. It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but it was different. I nodded once. It's not just how it looks, I said. It's what happened. She exhaled slowly, glancing toward her car again. From this angle, the position was clearer. The front tire slightly angled where it shouldn't be, the bumper too close to the structure. It wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. I didn't think I was that close, she said, almost to herself. That's fair, I replied, but we still need to deal with it. There was a pause, but this time it didn't feel tense. It felt like a reset. Kathy uncrossed her arms and picked up her drink again, though she didn't sip it. She just held it, thinking. So, what happens now? She asked. It wasn't defensive anymore. It sounded like an actual question. I gestured lightly toward the front of the porch. We take a proper look, figure out what needs attention. Then we go from there. She hesitated for a second, then gave a small nod. All right. The shift was subtle, but everyone felt it. The energy in the group eased, not back to the original relaxed mood, but away from the earlier tension. A couple of my friends stepped slightly closer again, not crowding, just present in a supportive way. We walked together toward the edge of the porch. Up close, the damage was still minor, but clearer than before. The support post had shifted just enough to affect alignment, and a section of the railing would definitely need repair. Nothing dangerous, but not something you'd ignore either. Kathy crouched slightly to look at the base of the post. Okay, yeah, she said. That's not great. I didn't respond right away. I just let her observe. It's fixable, I said after a moment, but it'll take some work. She stood back up, brushing her hands together lightly as if she'd actually touched something. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said. I know, I replied. Intent isn't the issue. She nodded slowly. For a second, it looked like she might say more, but instead, she shifted to something more practical. Do you have someone you usually call for this kind of thing? She asked. I can figure that out, I said. That part's manageable. Another pause. Then, finally, something closer to accountability. Look, she said, adjusting her grip on the drink, I probably should have said this earlier, but I'm sorry about the porch. It wasn't overly emotional. It wasn't dramatic, but it was direct. And that mattered. I appreciate that, I said. She nodded once, like she was accepting that as enough for now. We stood there for a moment longer, both looking at the porch, not because there was more to analyze, but because it gave the situation a clear endpoint. It wasn't abstract anymore. It was something real, something that would be handled. Behind us, the quiet murmur of conversation started to return. One of my friends made a light comment, nothing about the situation, just something neutral. Another responded. Slowly, naturally, the rhythm of the evening began to rebuild itself. Kathy glanced back toward the group. They just continuing, she asked. Yeah, I said. That was always the plan. She gave a small, almost surprised smile. That's actually kind of impressive. It's just a small gathering, I replied. Didn't take much to begin with. She nodded, then looked back at me. I didn't realize this was your birthday, by the way, she said. I just saw people and lights and assumed it was something open. That happens, I said. There was a brief silence, but this one felt lighter. So, she said, am I still allowed to be here? It wasn't the same tone she'd used earlier when she walked in uninvited. This time, it sounded like an actual request. I considered it for a second. You're welcome to stay, I said, as long as we're clear about everything. She nodded quickly. Yeah, we're clear. All right, I said. And just like that, the situation moved forward. We walked back toward the rest of the group. The shift wasn't instant, but it was steady. Conversations picked back up. Someone adjusted the music. A few people rearranged chairs slightly, almost instinctively pulling things back into place. The porch still wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Kathy stayed near the edge of the group at first, quieter than before. She listened more than she spoke, occasionally adding a comment when it fit. The intensity she'd arrived with had softened into something more measured. At one point, she even helped move a couple of items on the table to make space, something small but noticeable. The night didn't return to exactly what it had been earlier, but it found a new balance. Later on, as things started to wind down, a few of my friends helped gather plates and clear the table. The lights still glowed softly across the porch, casting long, steady shadows. Kathy approached me again, this time without the earlier urgency. I'll follow up about the repairs, she said. Just let me know what you find out. I will, I replied. She nodded. And, again, sorry about the way I handled it at first. I looked at her for a moment. I appreciate you saying that, I said. She gave a small, thoughtful smile, then stepped back. Happy birthday, by the way, she added. Thanks, I said. And then she left, this time carefully, deliberately, making sure the car stayed exactly where it was supposed to. As the night came to a close and the last of the guests headed out, the house grew quiet again. I stayed on the porch for a while, looking at the slightly shifted post, the railing that would need fixing, the small imperfections left behind by the evening. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it also wasn't as bad as it could have been. What stood out more than the damage was the way the situation unfolded. How quickly things can shift when someone refuses to acknowledge reality, and how equally quickly they can stabilize when boundaries are made clay. I'd spent years being polite by default, keeping things smooth, avoiding unnecessary friction.